A single decision was made behind palace walls, and almost no one outside noticed it at first. There were no flashing cameras, no balcony appearances, no dramatic announcement meant for headlines. But those closest to the crown say this choice quietly shifted everything. It wasn't symbolic. It wasn't temporary. And it wasn't made lightly. For months, conversations had been unfolding in private rooms, filled with tension, hesitation, and the kind of silence that only exists when the stakes are enormous. At the center of it all stood Prince William and Catherine, facing a moment that could redefine what the monarchy becomes next. The public hasn't heard the full story yet, but the effects are already rippling outward. And once this line was crossed, there was no going back. William walks through corridors that remember centuries. These halls have seen crowns rise and fall, families unite and fracture, and decisions made that altered the course of history. He is not king yet, but the weight is already there. He grew up under the gaze of the world, shaped by duty long before he understood what that word truly meant. As a child, he learned that being royal meant discipline, restraint, and silence. From his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, he saw unwavering devotion to duty. From his parents' struggles, he learned what happens when private pain becomes public spectacle. And from loss at an early age, he learned how to carry grief while the world watches and waits for composure. That kind of upbringing does not fade. It settles into you, quietly shaping every choice. Now older, married, and raising children of his own, William feels the pressure differently. He is no longer just a son or a brother. He is a future king being measured before his reign has even begun. The monarchy he will inherit is not the one his grandmother ruled. Public trust is more fragile now. Silence is no longer seen as strength, and traditions once protected by distance are increasingly questioned. William understands that avoiding decisions is itself a decision, and that the cost of delay grows heavier with time. For years, there have been issues the palace preferred not to resolve fully, files that were reviewed but never closed, questions raised quietly, then set aside. At the center of much of this lingering discomfort is Prince Andrew. Reports have circulated for a long time about financial arrangements and associations that made advisors uneasy. Nothing publicly declared illegal, nothing conclusively cleared either, just unanswered questions that refused to disappear. In the past, the approach was to wait, soften, and protect, to believe time itself would be enough to bury discomfort. But time didn't bury it. It preserved it. New advisors reportedly revisited old records and noticed gaps that should have been addressed years ago. The concern wasn't just about money or paperwork. It was about perception and trust. When explanations are delayed too long, even innocent matters begin to look questionable. And in a world where institutions are expected to justify themselves, secrecy can feel like guilt even when it isn't. William was briefed on these concerns. He listened. He asked questions. And he realized this was not something he could pass along to the next generation, untouched throughout all of this. Catherine watched quietly. She has always led without raising her voice. Coming from outside royal bloodlines, she sees the institution differently. She understands tradition, but she also understands public expectation. She knows that the monarchy does not belong only to the family, but to the people who support it. According to those close to the couple, it was Catherine who framed the question that stayed with William the longest. What kind of monarchy would their children inherit if difficult truths were always postponed? What would it mean to ask for public trust while avoiding transparency? Late-night conversations followed. No shouting, no ultimatums. Just the slow realization that protecting the institution might require ending a pattern the family had relied on for generations. Silence had once preserved stability. Now it threatened it. Reports suggest that William began to see that shielding family members from accountability didn't strengthen the crown anymore. It weakened it. Eventually, the moment came when discussion ended and choice began. In a closed meeting with senior advisors, legal experts, and Catherine beside him, William made his position clear. According to sources familiar with the discussion, he insisted that unresolved questions could no longer remain internal. There would be independent review. There would be transparency. And there would be clear separation between personal family ties and institutional protection. This was not about punishment, but about boundaries. The reaction inside the room was reportedly tense. Some advisors warned of permanent family damage. Others cautioned about public fallout. But William is said to have responded with a simple truth. Accountability must apply equally, or it means nothing at all. The Crown, he believed, could not demand trust while shielding itself from scrutiny. Institutional protection would end, even if family relationships remained. Catherine's role in this moment was not dramatic. She didn't speak often. She didn't need to. Her presence reinforced the decision rather than steering it. Those who witnessed it say the choice felt final, not emotional, but deeply heavy. This was a line drawn deliberately, knowing it could not be erased later. The consequences were immediate, though quiet. Inside palace walls, staff sensed the shift. New standards appeared. Old assumptions disappeared. Long-serving aides felt unsettled, while younger staff saw something overdue. Family dynamics reportedly cooled. Certain conversations stopped mid-sentence when William entered rooms. Support remained polite, but warmth faded in places it once lived easily. Even King Charles III, while publicly supportive, is said to have carried mixed emotions privately, balancing pride in his son with awareness of what had been lost. There were no celebrations, no victory speeches. This kind of change doesn't feel triumphant. It feels lonely. It costs relationships. It forces distance where closeness once existed. But it also begins to restore something else: credibility, slowly. Cautiously, the public perception of the monarchy began to shift. Not dramatically, but subtly. A sense that this was an institution willing to confront discomfort instead of burying it. William understands that this decision will define him long before any coronation. Some will always see it as betrayal. Others will see it as overdue courage. Historians will debate it. Family members may never fully forgive it, but his children will grow up knowing their father chose integrity over ease. That he refused to pass inherited silence down another generation. Catherine remains beside him, not behind him, not in shadow. Together they represent a quieter evolution of monarchy, one that understands survival depends on trust, not mystique. The palace still stands. The traditions still exist. But something essential has changed inside those ancient walls. The crown did not shatter. It adjusted. This was not a dramatic revolution. It was a single decision, made carefully, painfully, and deliberately. A decision that said, accountability matters more than comfort. That truth matters more than protection, and that the institution must always be bigger than the individuals within it. Long after the details fade, this choice will remain as a turning point. The moment the monarchy proved it could change, not because it was forced to, but because its future demanded it. The strangest part was how normal everything looked on the outside. The gates still opened on schedule. The uniforms stayed crisp. The photo calls still happened. And yet, inside the system, people began speaking differently. Words like tradition and loyalty didn't disappear, but they stopped being the final argument that ended every conversation. Suddenly, there was a new phrase floating through private briefings and quiet offices: public expectation. And once that phrase becomes real inside an institution built on secrecy, it changes how everyone moves. Behind the scenes, the pressure didn't come from one single headline. It came from a slow build-up years of public skepticism, social media scrutiny, and the growing belief that powerful families write their own rules. For decades, the palace could rely on distance and mystique. But distance doesn't work the same way anymore. The public doesn't just read a newspaper and move on. They dissect, they connect dots. And even when something isn't proven, the feeling that something is being hidden can do damage all on its own. William saw that risk clearly. If he wanted the monarchy to survive into his children's adulthood, it couldn't keep treating uncomfortable questions like they were temporary storms that would blow over. That's what made the Andrews issue so dangerous. Not only what people accused him of, but how long the institution looked like it was trying to outlast the conversation instead of addressing it. Over time, the story stopped being about one man and became about the monarchy's reflex to protect itself. Even the most loyal supporters began to ask the same question in different ways. Why does everything take so long? Why does every explanation feel incomplete? And why does accountability always seem to apply differently depending on the title? In private, there's been buzz for years that the old system worked like this. You manage the optics, contain the story, keep it from spreading, and protect the institution by protecting the people tied to it. But reports suggest William saw a flaw in that thinking. If the institution survives by shielding its own, then eventually the institution becomes the shield. One of the most repeated rumors among royal watchers is that William and Andrew were never particularly close in adulthood. Not enemies, not openly hostile, just distant, separated by age, lifestyle, and different reputations. But distance doesn't make the choice easier. If anything, it makes it sharper, because then it becomes less about emotion and more about principle. And principle, inside a family like this, can feel like a weapon even when it's meant to be a shield. That's where Catherine's influence reportedly mattered the most. Not because she forced a decision, but because she reframed what the decision actually meant. In the old royal mindset, confronting a family member publicly looks like disloyalty. In Catherine's mindset, refusing to confront it looks like asking the public to carry a burden they never agreed to carry. That difference is everything. She wasn't saying, be harsh. She was saying, be clear. And clarity is the one thing the monarchy has often avoided when it gets uncomfortable. What happened next, according to people who follow palace dynamics closely, was a shift in strategy that felt almost unnatural for royal culture. Instead of trying to control every detail of the narrative, William and Catherine focused on controlling one thing only, the boundary. They didn't need to win the internet. They didn't need everyone to like them. They needed the public to understand one message. The crown is not a hiding place. That message alone, if held consistently, could do more for long-term survival than any carefully worded statement ever could. But that kind of boundary creates a problem. No one talks about enough. Once you draw it, people start asking who else should be on the other side of it. If Andrew is treated differently, then what about other royal controversies, past and present? What about the moments the palace stayed silent? What about the times the family chose private handling instead of public clarity? The line doesn't just separate one person from the institution. It invites the public to look at the entire system and ask what else has been protected. And that's the part that reportedly terrified older advisors, because the monarchy's greatest strength has always been its ability to endure through controlled calm. It survives by not reacting like ordinary people. It survives by keeping emotion off the surface. But the modern world punishes institutions that appear cold and evasive. And if there's one thing William understands, it's that public trust is not inherited the way titles are. Trust is earned. And once it's gone, no crown can simply demand it back. So the palace began adjusting in ways that looked small but felt huge to the people inside. Internal protocols reportedly changed. Representation rules became stricter. The language used around official versus private became sharper. Even who gets access to certain privileges began to feel less automatic. None of this needed a big announcement. It didn't need a dramatic new era speech. It simply needed consistency, because consistency, over time, becomes credibility still. Even if the institution tightened, the family itself couldn't tighten in the same way. Blood is blood. You can end institutional shielding, but you can't erase decades of shared history. That's why the fallout reportedly showed up in subtler places. The stiffness at gatherings, the careful pauses, the polite smiles that don't reach the eyes, the kind of emotional frost you can't photograph, but you can feel it in a room. People assume royal drama looks like shouting. It rarely does. It looks like distance. And this is where King Charles becomes a complicated figure in the story, because Charles is both father and king. He understands duty, but he also understands the deep instinct to keep the family together. Sources and commentators have often suggested Charles has spent much of his life trying to balance modern expectations with a traditional institution. His reign began in a world that doesn't give monarchs the benefit of the doubt the way it used to. And that means every family scandal is no longer a family issue. It becomes a test of the crown itself. If William's approach is more direct, it also risks making Charles look like he moved too slowly. Not because Charles did nothing, but because the public's patience is different now. The internet doesn't compare you to your predecessors kindly. It compares you to what it believes you should have done yesterday. And when William draws a clean boundary, it automatically raises the question of why that boundary wasn't drawn earlier. That's the quiet pressure a father can't easily admit to his son. But William didn't have the luxury of choosing the most comfortable route. He could either inherit the old pattern and hope the public eventually stops caring, or he could change the pattern and accept the internal cost. And in a family that measures everything in decades and dynasties, choosing the internal cost is almost unheard of. That's why people describe it as a turning point, not because it's dramatic on the surface, but because it breaks an instinct that has protected royal families for generations. And yet, for all the pain it brings, the new approach has one powerful effect. It removes the fog. The monarchy doesn't have to pretend it's perfect. It simply has to prove it's accountable. That's a very different kind of legitimacy. Instead of mystique, it offers responsibility. Instead of silence, it offers standards. And strangely, that can make the institution feel more human, not because it confesses everything, but because it stops acting untouchable. There's also another layer people rarely mention. William and Catherine aren't making these choices in theory. They're making them with their children in mind. Their kids are growing up in a world where every old clip can be resurfaced, every rumor can be recycled, and every inconsistency can become a trending topic overnight. If they inherit a monarchy filled with unresolved scandals, they inherit a war they didn't start. William's decision, in that sense, isn't just about the present. It's about clearing the path so the next generation doesn't spend its entire life defending the past. And that's the thing about quiet decisions. They don't feel heroic when you make them. They feel like loss. They feel like choosing to be misunderstood. They feel like giving up warmth for principle. But history doesn't usually reward the people who kept everyone comfortable. It remembers the people who were willing to change the rules when the rules stopped working. Still, one question keeps hovering over this entire story, and it won't go away. If William and Catherine are willing to draw this line now, what else are they willing to change later? Because once you prove you can break one, royal habit, especially the habit of protective silence, it becomes harder to argue that other habits must stay forever. People begin to expect modernization in other areas too, and the monarchy, whether it likes it or not, becomes engaged in a new kind of contract with the public. We will keep our role, but we will earn it. That contract is fragile. It can't survive on one decision alone. It needs follow-through. It needs consistency over years, not weeks. And it needs the couple at the center of it to stay aligned. Because if William and Catherine ever disagree publicly about the direction, the institution will wobble instantly. That's why, according to royal observers, their unity matters almost as much as the policy itself. It signals stability while the system adjusts. And just when people thought the palace had settled into this new rhythm, more whispers started circulating, less about what was done and more about what might come next. Reports and speculation have suggested that the Andrew issue wasn't the only file that made advisors nervous, that it might have simply been the one William chose to address first because it was the most visible, the most damaging, and the most urgent to separate from the crown. If that's true, then this decision wasn't a final chapter. It was the opening move. Because once the monarchy starts choosing clarity over comfort, it doesn't just change how the public sees the royals, it changes how the royals see themselves. And that kind of internal shift is the one thing that can reshape the crown before a new king ever wears it. But the next part of the story is where things get even more tensy. Because the moment William drew that line, it didn't just create headlines, it created enemies, expectations, and pressure from places the public rarely sees. And what happened next forced William and Catherine to realize the hardest truth of all. Changing the monarchy is one thing. Surviving the backlash is another.